So I read an obituary that he wrote after Amy had passed, and there was just, a couple of sentences that I fancied reading out just to see if we could maybe talk them through a little bit. So yeah, he's talking here about time that Amy spent in a health clinic in North London. This wasn't strictly rehab, but it was basically a kind of, I don't want to use the word detox clinic, but that might be the best to describe it. Somewhere she could go for a few days and get off alcohol and drugs. So he said, looking back on it now, it's obvious to me that the main reason I enjoyed spending time with Amy in that clinic was because it was so full of hope. In my mind thinking, great, she's sober and this time it's for good. This is how it's always going to be, just like when we met. It was an incredibly naive and somewhat selfish dream, which removed anything she was going through emotionally and physically from the scenario. Nevertheless, it was a dream I would happily buy into each time she checked herself in there. So I know we've been digging out Mark Ronson a little bit, but I actually think that's probably catching him at one of his more self-aware moments.
Yeah.
But I still think that it highlights the fact that Amy Winehouse was and is a figure that people endlessly project their own lives, their own hopes, their own thoughts onto. She's not the only person that people do this to, because there are other figures, who have died young, or those who take a break from releasing music for, personal tragedy. But I don't know, I feel like when she's brought up in conversation, so much of it is steered towards, I wish she'd got better, like think of all the music she could have made, and this idea of like wasted talent or lost time. And it makes me feel uncomfortable. It kind of posits her experience and misfortune as this kind of inconvenience, and that her death was just like a kind of irritating sad note to all these amazing albums that she would have ended up releasing.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because I find the projection goes one of two ways. So it's either what you describe, where it's like, as you say, it's just, a mild inconvenience. Think of all the tours she could have done, all the money and all the good art that I could have, been subjected to if she'd lived. Or it's the complete inverse, where it's like everything that ever happened in her life is only in the shadow of her depression and her death. And I think if you can see this, if you go on YouTube videos of her playing live, and even like 2005, for example, so, or maybe even earlier, 2004, before, let's say, the paparazzi and the drugs had really, really taken hold, all the comments are like, oh wow, such a beautiful voice, but if you look at her eyes, they're so distant and lost. And it's like, no, like, stop with the projection. Yeah. It doesn't have to be that every moment of her waking life is in the shadow of the fact that she died. Like, not every moment she was depressed, not every moment in her life she was on drugs. Like, it doesn't have to be one of two ways. It doesn't have to be, oh, why couldn't she get clean, I'm missing out on music. And it doesn't have to be, oh wow, all her life was a tragedy. She was a person, and it dehumanizes her, I think, when people focus on one or the other. The other thing I wanted to say that I think I notice a lot, and I think it's kind of quite troubling and almost ironic, is that the catalyst for all this stuff happening was the fact that her global hit was Rehab. Like, this song, which she basically defiantly talks about refusing to go to rehab. And that became her like unique selling point. So suddenly Amy Winehouse was this person who, I'll never go to rehab, I'm devoted to excess. And from that point on, like, the narrative around her was, she's a druggie, she gets fucked up, she doesn't care, she loves excess. And all the complexity and ambiguity of her personality was completely taken out of it. What I would say that this relationship she had with the press and the paparazzi that we've talked about, it wasn't a two-way relationship. It had three parts. There was the press, there was Amy, and then there was the public. And it was a truly parasitical relationship, all round, for all three parties. The papers relied on us as much as her for their existence. She provided the fodder for the newspapers, and we were basically the fools who bought it. And she had press outside her house 24/7. There were paps referring to her as the Pied Piper of Camden, stuff like that. And I think, as we talked about, individuals projecting onto her what they want is one thing, yes. But it wasn't just the press, it wasn't just the tabloids, it wasn't just the gossip mags and the Daily Mail and the Mirror and all that kind of shit. It was mainstream media too. If you look in the documentary, there's moments with Graham Norton, Jay Leno, Frankie Boyle, Simon Amstel, all treating her as like a punchline. She's basically everyone's favourite punch bag. And I think one of the reasons, and maybe you'll agree with me, Ollie, or maybe you won't, one of the reasons people were so collectively devastated by her death is because it held a mirror up to our relationship with her and our relationship with the press. Like, we were complicit in that. We are not above it, me and you personally, Ollie, either. And I think maybe our sadness at her death is a bit tinged with guilt, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the documentary, the Asif Kapadia documentary, when it came out in the cinema, and I remember leaving that day and thinking, wow, that was a piece of cinema that basically holds a mirror up to the press. And then when I rewatched it this week, I felt, wow, that's a mirror that holds, that's a piece of film that holds a mirror up to us as society. Exactly what you were just saying, because it wasn't just them. We're the ones that fuel it. It's so interesting, man. I think the Frankie Boyle bit, because he's basically like reinvented himself as this kind of woke spokesperson.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
And I would love to know what he thinks about making those comments now. Because that was one of the bits that shocked me, because in the last few years his kind of public persona has gone from will say absolutely anything to this kind of like liberal woke spokesperson.
But you have this. I mean, like, because you expect it from Jay Leno, right? Like, no one gives a. Jay Leno's a twat. Like, you expect him to be that.
Yeah, even though she went on his show and performed really well, it's like
fuck that guy. But like Graham Norton as well. Like, Graham Norton is this kind of national treasure, right? And it's like, oh wow, how could you hate Graham Norton? Like, even if you're not into like late night TV, he does such an amazing job of getting all the celebrities. Like, even he was taking shots. That's what I mean. Like, all of us were complicit. It wasn't just the rags. Speaking of the documentary, sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, let's go on to the doc.
Speaking about the documentary, because you're saying that you felt they held up a mirror to all of us. I'm not so sure, man. Like, for example, I'm thinking of a couple of specific moments, and I ask you about them. The moment where they show her body bag being carried out of her house. We're watching a dead body of someone being carried to an ambulance. Is that appropriate? Is that holding up a mirror, or is that not just indulging in exactly the same thing that the press and we did? I don't think that was justified in the film, personally.
Yeah, I'd say there are like 3 or 4 moments in the film that are really borderline. There's that moment. There's a moment when she's at Bestival, if you remember, and she's skeletal and holding a drink, and the idea is that she's been pushed to this point. And I remember thinking, like, fucking hell, like, this is really difficult to watch. But I think part of it has to be the kind of shock factor of this is what the press does. Like, fair enough, she had her own problems, but she's been driven to this point by society. I can completely understand what you're saying, that it is, maybe it is too far. I'd give them the benefit of the doubt, but I can see why people would, be pissed off.
I just think it's such a fine line between the doc paying homage to her talent or paying homage to her fame. And I think that the doc doesn't focus enough on her talent. Like, there isn't kind of moments where, because her downfall will be even more tragic and even more powerful as a message if we got to see more of her being this incredible talent. And there's people who work with her in Remy's studio in Miami who said that they were interviewed for the film, but they're not going to watch it, and their part isn't put in the film because they wanted to talk about her talent. They didn't want to talk about her fame and all the tabloid stuff. So I mean, that's the thing you've got to remember. It is the director's, it's his version of what happened. So you obviously just got to bear that in mind. Yeah, you're absolutely right.